Thank you so much, Marcia. And as usual, we have a very special guest on this program. So special that Sports Illustrated wants referencing as the Roger Federer of tennis media. He is the managing partner of New Chapter Media, tournament director of the Marty Fish Foundation Tennis Tournament, and also a best selling author of many books, including Today in Tennis History. Welcome, no other than my good friend, Randy Walker. How are you doing?
Justin, I'm doing great. Great to connect with you. I was reminded on Facebook this week with the memories that it was 4 years ago this week when you and I met in watching Barbados' own Darian King playing in the U.S. Open qualifying. And it was great to meet you after emailing a bunch during the Olympics. So I'm glad that we kept the friendship up and we're talking here today.
So unfortunate you mentioned that because neither of us can be at the U.S. Open right now. I also often tell my friends that I refer to it as the Disney World of sporting events. So like, it's a bummer for me because I've been to like 4 straight U.S. Opens before this year. So I know I've only been to 4. So how is it for you personally not to be at this year's U.S. Open?
Well, it seems a little weird. I mean, I've been to every U.S. Open as a fan or working since 1979.
Wow.
So I went to the U.S. Open as a 10-year-old in 1979, and I've been, every year since, as a fan up until 1992, and then 1992 was the first year when I was working for the USTA all the way through 2005. And then since 2005, I've had various other responsibilities working for TV, for the Tennis Channel, CBS, and also covering the tournament for WorldTennisMagazine.com and so forth. So it's a little strange not being there, and certainly it's bad not to have the streak continue. But very, very happy that the USTA was able to pull it off and to have the event and to give people entertainment on television, at least, to be able to watch the tournament on television, and also to give these players an opportunity to compete. And, certainly for a lot of those players, they need a paycheck. So being able to give those players a paycheck is really important. So I'll be glued to the television for 2 weeks and watch pretty much as much as I can remotely here from Vero Beach, Florida, where I am right now.
So yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that you're in Florida right now. Considering the numbers of cases that you've had over the months, and also at one point the cases had skyrocketed in New York, was there ever a point that you were concerned that the USTA would not be able to pull off?
I kind of always felt like they were going to pull it off. I know that, I worked for the USTA, for 13 or so years, and, they're a very innovative organization. And, certainly there was the case where, when the pandemic, started to come to fruition in the United States and in March, everybody always kind of thought, oh, this is only going to be just for a little while. It's just going to be 4 weeks. It's going to be 6 weeks. It's going to be 8 weeks, etc. And then when it became a little more serious, the USTA was, starting to put it out there that, we're going to try to hold the tournament. We're going to make the decision by early, late May or early June, etc., whatever the deadline was. And I always felt like things were going to improve and that they were going to pull it off. And I actually had even said privately to people, I thought that the U.S. Open not only was going to happen, but that there were going to be fans allowed, or at least a limited amount of fans. And, certainly that didn't pan out, or they haven't announced that yet. But, you're seeing in other sports, you're seeing in football and basketball, or mainly football, that a lot of these college teams and NFL teams are saying, hey, we're going to be able to have fans in the stadium, but they're only going to be at 20% capacity, et cetera. And there have been some events that have gone on in the United States where they have been fans in attendance, but it's only been 20% capacity. For instance, World Team Tennis at the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. That was a very there wasn't a lot of COVID cases in West Virginia, so they were able to have a limited amount of fans there. And the infection rate right now in New York City is basically 0.5%. So there's really not a lot of transmission of the disease in New York right now. So that's kind of that threat has dissipated tremendously. But obviously, we don't know a lot about the disease. We don't know if it can spike up and so forth. But the USDA has done an amazing job in keeping everybody in a bubble there, and so far so good. As far as no cases, no trouble so far. So fingers crossed.
Well, I know you're not there, Randy, as I'm not there either, unfortunately. But given the bubble-like restrictions that the USTA is putting on these players, and the fact that there are no fans, what do you think the impact will be on, for the actual on-court play for these players?
Well, I think that a lot of people are discussing how the players are going to react to the atmosphere or the lack of atmosphere, and that some players who really thrive on the U.S. Open chaos, being in front of 5,000 fans, screaming and drinking and heckling, and the U.S. Open atmosphere, where some people really thrive in that environment. Certainly, the more advanced, higher ranked players that are used to that kind of and the loudness and the just the circus that is the US Open in New York. And if you're an inexperienced player and you get thrown into that, boy, you're shell shocked. You're already down 50 love every game because of that atmosphere. So I think it's going to be more of an equalizer, that you are going to see more upsets. You are going to see more players that are, they're playing against a top-ranked player, and it's just basically on a backyard court, atmosphere. So I think you'll see a little bit more, upsets and a little bit more equalizer. I mean, certainly a player like Novak Djokovic, who's, pretty much head and shoulders above most field. I think he could pretty much, handle any atmosphere, and I think he actually might actually prefer a more quiet atmosphere. So that's something that's going to be interesting to look at. I think somebody like Serena Williams, she thrives on that, and she gets pumped up by the crowd and so forth. So it's going to be interesting to see how she can kind of pump herself up, and if she's down, she's not going to have 20,000 people roaring for her to get back into a match and so forth. So I think it's going to be fascinating view. So I can't wait. I'm not going to be there. In a lot of ways, I'm actually a lot more intrigued this year by the U.S. Open based on the unusual atmosphere.
So you actually brought me directly to my next question. Let's go straight into Novak. Obviously, he is the clear favorite to win yet another Grand Slam. But in your mind, will there be an asterisk on this one, considering obviously there will be no Rafa and there's no Roger?
No asterisks. No asterisks. So you look at, I actually wrote a column on this on my website, worldtennismagazine.com, and I did a little podcast about it too, that there's no asterisks at the U.S. Open this year because through the history of tennis, there's been many other major tournaments, Grand Slam tournaments, that have had similar draw strengths and so forth. You look at like the French Open in the 70s and the Australian Open in the 70s and the 80s, where the fields were not that strong. You look at somebody like Guillermo Vilas. Guillermo Vilas won, he's one of the all-time great players, Hall of Famer. Probably his second biggest title that he won in his career was the 1977 French Open. But that tournament didn't have Bjorn Borg, didn't have Jimmy Connors, didn't have Vitas Gerulaitis, didn't have Manuel Orantes, all who were in the top 6 in the world. If you don't have Jimmy Connors, number 1 player in the world, and Bjorn Borg, other than Rafael Nadal, the greatest clay court player of all time, who only lost 2 matches ever at the French Open. If you don't have those 2 guys in the French Open draw, do you put an asterisk by that? etc. For many years at the Australian Open in the mid 70s into the mid 80s, there was only an average of 1 top 20 player in the Australian Open field. So there was no asterisks, with that. During World War II, the U.S. Open or U.S. Championships at the time was played. It was primarily American players, no asterisks there. Talk about no fans. The 1969 Open was played in Brisbane, Australia, and they could barely draw flies. Rod Laver won that. Those flies in Australia, but
massive even.
But Rod Laver won that Australian Open in 1969. That was the first leg of his Grand Slam, and for the final, they barely had 1,000 people there. So you look at by the time this U.S. Open is all said and done, you may have 1,000 or 2,000 healthcare workers, staff, etc. In the stands at Arthur Ashe Stadium. It's 23,000 seat stadium. You can pretty much do a lot of social distancing there and so forth. So no asterisks at the U.S. Open. It's unfortunate that some of the players pulled out, but they're every right to do that. It's everybody's personal decision, and but absolutely no asterisks. So if you want more information on that, read that on my column. No asterisks.
Please read Randy's column. I have to get around to it, I must admit. So I hope during this time that he actually gives me a link or a plug as to how to find this column so I can read it personally. We like to put people on our guests on the spot on this show, so we won't let you get away. As you said, it's no asterisk. So do you see Novak, as he said, he's clear head and shoulders above the rest of the field? Do you see Novak winning again? Or do you see a situation where Dominic Thiem or Stefano Tsitsipas or maybe even Alexander Zverev use these conditions with no crowd, as you mentioned, to finally break through and win their first?
Well, I think so far, I think one of the things that's interesting this year about the U.S. Open is there's also a new court surface. It's Lakoid. I don't know how to specifically pronounce it, but for years it was Deco True, and now they have a new court surface. So I think that's also going to change things up a little bit. I mean, Novak is certainly a player to beat. He's, head and shoulders the number one player in the world, best player out there, best player in the field right now. But with the fast courts, you just don't know how that's going to happen. So, Novak's definitely the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else, one of those new up-and-comings, those next-gen guys, maybe gets them. Or maybe a big server like John Isner, whose serve would really benefit from those faster courts. Maybe he, goes deep. But that's what's going to make it so exciting, is that it's so unpredictable, this year. And even more so, I think, on the women's.
You're just predicting my questions, because that's the very next one. Not only do I want you to call it a women's winner, but as a follow-up question to that, we have discussed on the show, I think, a couple of times, especially with your friend Carl Hill, how disappointed we are in the lack of consistency among the top players. The two Pliskova sisters, Americans, Madison Keys and Sloane Stephens, Simona Halep, Petra Kvitova. I'm sure I'm missing out on plenty others. They have not been able, Naomi Osaka, they would win a Grand Slam here, and then you'd see them get beaten the first round by opponents who have not even called just now. Does the lack of consistency in women's tennis post-Williams era concern you? And then also give me your winner in the women's field.
Wow. Well, Brad Gilbert said on ESPN that he could see as many as 30, any one of 30 women in the draw win the tournament. And that's about right. I mean, it can be anybody can win the tournament. Karolina Pliskova, she plays very well on fast courts. She's the number one seed. She's never won a major. I think with the fast court, she's going to be, Serena. She's going for Grand Slam singles title number 24 to tie Margaret Court. She's going to be tough to beat. There's really anybody that can win. I think it's exciting, though, that there's so many different players that have been able to win on the Grand Slam stage in women's tennis. And I personally like that. I love looking at a draw and seeing unpredictable and who's going to get to the semis, who's going to get to the finals, who's going to win. And, it's more exciting to me to see a player try to break through and win their first major as opposed to, seeing who's going to win number 18 or number 19 between, Rafa and Novak and, seeing them play for the 48th time. I mean, I'd rather see, I don't want to see the rich get richer. I want to see, someone become rich for the first time. That's more, exciting to me. So, I've been a lot more intrigued by the women's game in the last few years just because of the unpredictability. So, gosh, I mean, I'm going to respectfully pound picking a women's winner because, it really could be anybody. And there are 32 seats now in the women's field. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an unseeded player. Even on the men's side, there could be an unseeded player win it. So I can't wait to watch.
Speaking of unseeded players, does the fact that the tournament doesn't have a qualifying draw, does that really impact either field as much, or does it really, considering that these players are going to be unseeded, does it really, have no sway over the end, the outcome at all?
Yeah, no, I feel so bad that those players are not getting a chance because all they want is a chance to compete. They want to get out there. Every player has dreams, and they have dreams when they want to become professional tennis players to play the big stage. When you and I saw that with Darian King, we saw him, his dream was to play the Olympics, and he got to play the Olympics on the big stage. And then he qualified for the U.S. Open, and he played Zverev on Arthur Ashe Stadium court. I mean, he's going to be telling that story for, the rest of his life that he had that chance. And that was his U.S. Open final. So for those players to not have that chance is crushing, and to not have that chance to fulfill their dreams, that's awful. But when it, comes down to the tournament is staged to determine the champion of the United States Championships for the year. And when you look back through the history of the tournament, there have only been 4 players in the men and the women who have emerged through the qualifying rounds that have even gone as far as the quarterfinals. So, there's, a very, practically a 0 chance that a player that would be in the qualifying would win the tournament. So it doesn't really have an effect on who's going to win the tournament, but it's just a shame that those players, don't get a chance to have their chance at glory. But this is extraordinary circumstances. The USTA had to make some very difficult decisions, and life isn't always fair, and in this case, it's not really fair for those guys. And hopefully, they'll get a chance to, have an opportunity to play in the qualifying rounds of major tournaments for years to come, and to have their shot at.
Well, going on, just straying a bit away from the U.S. Open and making it more overarching. Eventually, at some point, we don't know when, but eventually, the big 3 have to, bow down and step away from tennis. Where do you see the state of men's tennis afterwards? Do you think it's going to take a step down because of the glory years of these 3 men have kind of propelled the sport along so much? Do you think the sport, takes a step back? Or do you see a situation where Thiem or Zverev or Tsitsipas continue the lofty standards of men's tennis as it is right now?
Well, everybody's been I'm sure if they've been waiting for it or anticipating it. I think they've been kind of, dreading the time. Oh, when Novak and Rafa and Roger are no longer going to be on the stage, what's men's tennis going to look like? Well, we're going to get a preview of that right now because there's no Rafa in the field. He chose not to play, and Roger is injured and he's not playing. So Novak is the only one of the big 3 who's playing. So we're going to get a preview of what men's tennis is going to look like in the years to come right here at the 2020 U.S. Open. But it's all cyclical. I mean, this has been a generational conversation, every decade or so is what's it going to be like after, Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall retire, or after Stan Smith and Ilie Nastase retire. My first year when I was working full-time for the USTA was 1993 U.S. Open, and it was the first time that there was no John McEnroe or Jimmy Connors in the U.S. Open, and everybody was thinking like, oh, men's tennis is terrible. what's the next generation going to be like? This is going to be boring. We got this guy, Pete Sampras, who's not a real outgoing guy, and Michael Chang and Jim Courier and these Andre Agassi, and these guys don't really seem that exciting, etc. And then look what happened. It ended up being one of the great generations of American tennis, and certainly of tennis of all time. And Pete Sampras, went on to become, in his time, the greatest player, the greatest men's tennis player of all time. And then, the big three came on. So, I think that there'll probably be a little bit of a bump in the road, before that transition is fully accepted. But I fully see that, the Tsitsipas's, the Medvedevs, the Dominic teams and so forth, that they'll be, embraced, and they'll get more attention, and their personalities will shine, and they'll win multiple majors, and, tennis will continue to, keep on going.
In light of the fact that we're looking at the big three while they're still playing, I'm going to keep you on that hot seat, Randy. I want you to tell us, in your estimation, who is the greatest of all time?
Well, I think it's not not all the data has been put forth. The players are still active. I think if you were going to say right now, you'd have to say Roger Federer. He's won, the most majors. He's won, he's won the most majors. Rafael Nadal, most of his majors have been on clay. Certainly he's won Wimbledon. He's won the Australian Open. He's won the U.S. Open. But, he has double-digit, French Open championships. So he's certainly the greatest clay court player of all time. Rod Laver won 2 Grand Slams. One of them was in the amateur era. The other one was in the pro era, where everybody played. It's hard to argue with that. So there's a lot of data. You could argue any one of those guys, and you could throw Pete Sampras, in there. Well, and Pete certainly, played. You can read the case for Pete Sampras in the book that I just published, Pete Sampras, Greatness Revisited, by Steve Flink, where he, reviews Pete's, career, and puts forth, how great of a player he was, because everybody's certainly, forgotten him. But, you could say most accomplished player. You could say greatest player. It's tough to compare the eras, but, certainly Rod Laver, Pete Sampras, and then the big three, Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, and Roger Federer. On the women's side, certainly got to say Serena Williams, 23 majors, one shy of Margaret Court's, 24 majors. A lot of Margaret Court's majors were won with significantly smaller draws, with like 32, 56, 48, 64 draws. A lot of the Australian Open she won were only Australian players, with not that many, top players, international players playing them, etc. Margaret Court also won so many doubles majors and mixed doubles majors as well. I mean, she has the record for the all-time, majors wins. Martina Navratilova, she won 18 majors. So did Chris Evert. Martina won a ton of doubles majors, mixed doubles majors. She won the U.S. Open mixed doubles title at age 49.
Wow.
So I actually got asked by the Tennis Channel to vote in a poll that they were doing about, as far as the greatest of all time, men and women combined. Doesn't matter what gender, who's the greatest of all time. And I voted for Martina, because she won. She had the longest career. She won 18 majors in singles. She won U.S. Open mixed doubles at 49, and I voted for her as the greatest of all time. Both not distinguishing between the genders, and then also Steffi Graf. I mean, she won the Grand Slam, and she won the Grand Slam with a gold medal. Margaret Court also won a Grand Slam. Maureen Connolly won a Grand Slam in the 50s. But I think for the women, you'd have to say Graf, Court, Serena, Martina, Chrissy.
Okay, got you.
Those would be the greatest of all time.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna date myself right now and tell you that my favorite players are Steffi Graf and Pete Sampras. So I can guess you can tell how old I am just by those answers alone.
You're a '90s guy.
So I am indeed an 80s guy. I won't lie to you. So it's kind of like on this show, we don't shy away from the issues. And as we've seen now, the unrest has touched tennis. And you've had iconic moments with Althea Gibson and also Arthur Ashe. What sort of, and I mean, obviously this is right now tape recorded, so we don't know what's going to happen by Monday, by the time that this airs. But what sort of impact do you see the current social unrest in the US having potentially on the US Open draw?
Well, I don't think it's going to have an effect on the competition per se. The USTA is allowing players for this year only. Like you have like patches and hats and so forth that they're allowing players to have social justice messaging, which is a really great thing for the USTA to allow the players to do, because every player wants to voice an opinion about what's going on, in the world and in the United States and so forth. So that's a really great thing for the USTA to do. The tennis world, I think, has always been, I shouldn't say always been, but recently has been really ahead of social issues of the world. And I think that has to do with the fact that tennis is so international. And when you are involved in professional tennis, whether you're a player or a coach or media or agent or representative, that you're traveling the world and you're meeting people from all around the world, from different cultures and different backgrounds and different ethnicities. And there's really an understanding of, the issues, and what people's backgrounds are, and what sexual orientation they have, and so forth. So I think tennis has really been of late, in the last years, decades, etc., has really been at the forefront of social issues. We have great social justice warriors in tennis. Starting with Arthur Ashe. And what he did for social justice issues, in South Africa, and helping Haitian refugees in the 1980s, and Martina Navratilova, speaking of sexual rights and so forth. So tennis has really been to the forefront of this, and people have their voices and they have their platforms. And it's been really great to see young players like Naomi Osaka and Coco Gauff really take the torch and really be responsible about their platforms and making sure that their messages are getting out there for social justice and for the world to be a better place. And they have platforms and they're using those platforms, and that's a good thing. I mean, they're influential people and they're influencing the next generation. So I tip my hat to all the people in tennis around the world that are trying to make this a better world.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. We've kept you on much longer than we actually told you, and you have been extremely informative, especially as we look forward to the start of the U.S. Open. Unfortunately, neither of us can be there. But I hope in this post-COVID world that we will be able to link up for next year's Miami Open. Write it down,
yes,
Randy. Next year's Miami Open. Hopefully, you and I can get to watch some fantastic tennis. So I want to thank you again from us for appearing on the show. I hope you also have a copy of that Pete Sampras book just for this show. Neil may not read it, or Marshall, but he definitely will delve through every single page. And we also hope to have you back on the show as the U.S. Open progresses to the latter round, to the second week. So thank you once again, Randy.
Well, thank you, Justin. And, it's been great to reconnect with you. And I know we're connected on Facebook, and I love seeing all of your, interactions and so forth. And, give my best to the people of Barbados. What an amazing country. And I hope to visit there one day, and hope we can sit courtside somewhere to watch Darian King battle it out on some courts around the world. But all the best to you, all the best to Barbados, and things will be getting better, and we'll all be in better times soon down the road.
Okay, thank you so much, Randy. So as Randy goes, don't you disappear, viewers. We have a second half of the show coming, including social justice and the battle against racism in other sports, namely the NBA and NFL. So just hold on, and we'll be back shortly.